Okay, in this video I just wanted to discuss what makes a good video lens in the hope that it might help you expand your lens collection and help you avoid making some of the mistakes that I kind of made along the way. And these are all MFT lenses, but the information relates to any system. Okay, let's start with the kit lens. So the kit lens is generally the kind of lens that you'll get in a camera when you buy it. So you can buy body only deals on cameras, but more often than not there'll be a kit lens combo. And the kit lens is usually a zoom lens, it'll be variable aperture lens, and it's some of them are slightly more premium than others. This is a Leica kit lens, so it might be slightly better than some kit lenses you get. But can you shoot video on a kit lens? Definitely. Like, don't let people tell you you can't. You certainly can, but there are other lenses out there that are more suited to shooting video, and that's kind of what we'll go through in this video. So there are some features that will make it more suitable for particular styles of shooting. So the first one is constant aperture, and like I say, on this lens it's a variable aperture lens, so it goes from 2.8 to f4, and all that means is essentially as you're zooming, because the aperture is not constant, the same amount of light isn't coming into the lens through the whole zoom range. So as you zoom, the image will actually get slightly darker, and you'll have to compensate for that as you're zooming. But there are lenses out there that are, this only actually relates to zoom lenses, because a prime lens, for example, only has one aperture because it doesn't have that zoom range. So there are lenses out there. This is just an example. So the 35 to 100, this is a constant 2.8 aperture. So I can go all the way from 35 to 100mm on this lens, and the aperture will stay the same at f2.8. So that means when I'm zooming, I don't have to make any kind of corrections on the fly. It's all the settings are essentially still the same. So that is one very useful thing, especially if you plan on doing the kind of shooting where you're going to still be recording during zooming. So for stuff that I've done very often for event stuff, that is something you'll quite often do. You might be zooming into people and then back out to crowds and that kind of stuff. So it's for that kind of work it's really useful. And whilst we're talking about zoom and the kind of features of it, a lot of not a lot of, in some older lenses you would have a kind of a parfocal feature to them, and essentially what that means is you could be zoomed very far out. So let's take the example of the event where somebody stood up on the podium and I'm focused on them, but I'm doing a very wide shot, and then I decide to zoom right into that person, and then essentially what I can do is the focus of the person will stay exactly the same, so they're sharp throughout the whole zoom range. And like I say, on some older lenses you will get that. That is an old parfocal lens. Some newer lenses now, they have what's called electronic parfocal. So as you go through the range, this Leica 12 to 60 will do it. So as I go from 12 to 60, the electronic parfocal will actually adjust the focus as it goes to keep the subject in focus. And again, that's just very useful if you're doing that kind of shooting, or you want that effect where you want to be really wide on something and then tight onto something, and then you're not going to have to manually adjust the focus as you're zooming. And another thing you could kind of see as I was zooming on the kit lens, you can kind of see I go to 60 and the barrel of the lens is actually extending, and then I come back down to 12 and the barrel goes back in. With a more kind of premium video lens, you'll often find that the zoom barrel is actually internal, so you can see there I'm going from 35 to 100. You can probably just about see on the back of that. I'm going from 35 to 100, and the barrel is still, it's not moving, it stays the same size. And if you're somebody that kind of rigs up a camera, so you've got a cage, you've got maybe a follow focus, a matte box, it's especially useful for that. And actually, even if you do run and gun work where you've got a gimbal, it's also very useful for that, because the weight of the camera isn't consistently kind of shifting, so you're kind of zooming out and then the weight is sort of sitting on the front of the gimbal a little bit more, and it just throws everything out. So to my mind, having that kind of internal zoom is always much better. You know, you've got more continuity over the kind of weight of it, and you get a lot less sort of unexpected kind of lens shift with it. So it makes life a lot easier having that kind of internal zoom barrel. And then the next thing would be having kind of a wide aperture, or sort of a shallow depth of field. So for example, on these, like I say, this goes sort of 2.8 at the lowest end on this kit lens, up to 4 f4. So this one 2.8, like I say, it's a slightly more kind of premium video lens, but you can go, you know, as an example, in the MFT range, you can go f1.7, but once you get down to that as a constant aperture, you're looking at really, really expensive lenses, like top end. You know, there's a 10 to 25, a 25 to 50. They're lenses that, you know, they're over £1,000 used, and I've looked at them before and thought about it, and it's just not something I've ever really had the budget to step up to. But, you know, those lenses kind of exist in the kind of zoom range, but sort of as a zoom lens, but they're always very, very expensive. So a cheaper option you can go for, you know, there's lots of primes out there, and you've got sort of a lot of budget primes. I talked about this in a different video, this one. So if you're using MFT, you can kind of check the video out for that. But you know, this is only sort of just over £100. It's 25 mil f1.7. So, you know, it's got a better kind of shallow depth of field than even a sort of more expensive video lens, and it's much cheaper. But then, you know, you've got the kind of trade-off that it is just a 25 mil lens, so, you know, you're gonna have to do a lot more moving around to you know, compensate for that kind of lack of zoom range. And obviously it does change the look of things as well, depending on the zoom and the focal length and all of that. So you have to kind of take all that into kind of consideration when you're kind of thinking about this stuff. Another example of that is kind of, this is a Camlam 50 mil. Again, this is about 100 to 150 pounds, and with this, it's a manual lens, but you get a kind of a manual aperture of it down to f1.1, and that's, you know, the kind of better aperture you can get on a lens, or you know, the lower aperture number. You essentially, it's going to be better for low light. So this is a really good lens for kind of low light. It's also good for blurring out backgrounds and things like that. If you've got messy backgrounds that you don't want to show, it's quite useful for that. But then there's a little bit of a trade-off in that it's a manual lens. But sort of as a bit of a summary, you know, the prime lenses can be really useful. You know, they tend to be the cheaper for getting a better depth of field. You get a nice sharp image from them, but you just have to consider, if you're going to want to be changing focal lengths, you're going to be needing to take the lens off the camera. Again, if the camera's rigged up, that might be quite awkward. So you sort of got to think, you know, would you rather have a lens that maybe can't get quite as shallow a depth of field, but it covers a longer zoom range, or do you want one that you know, covers one single kind of focal length, but you know, it's got that nice shallow kind of depth of field look? And I would say one thing worth considering, if you've got a very shallow depth of field lens, and it's also a manual lens, obviously that is incredibly hard to keep in focus. So it's worth considering that it's really, if you're shooting at the, you know, very shallow depth of field, it's probably going to be something on a tripod that's probably fairly planned. And that kind of brings us into focus, really. You know, you can get manual lenses that have got sort of hard focus stops. Some people prefer to have AF. It really depends kind of how you shoot. It's yeah, you know, like I say, manual focus for planned shots and things, it's perfect for that. If you're doing kind of more run and gun stuff, it's possible that you'll probably want a good kind of autofocus lens. And even actually for older kind of you know, vintage lenses, cine lenses, there's actually options out there now to bring in